Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the carp fishing community, especially here in Arizona. I am recovering from getting sick. It's been a while since I've gotten sick. This one was particularly nasty. However, the Minute Clinic lady said that I did a pretty good job of being naturopathic and that I should just take some non-named Flonase. Personally, I bought it. I don't know that I'm going to use it. The list of allergic reactions, honestly, did not appeal to me to try to have. So, I was asked more than a few times to explain all the things of my methodology of breading for carp. So, there's tons of videos out there on breading for carp. I don't do underwater videos. I don't have a GoPro. I think that shit is a fucking waste of money. Maybe someday, but I'm fucking old. I need my money. And I'm already spending enough money as it is just to live in today's society. So it hasn't happened fucking yet. Anyway, I've got it compartmentalized, okay? The first list that I have is under the bits. So the terminal tackle. I use a micro swivel brand that's through a seller on eBay. I know they're on Amazon as well. It is a micro swivel that's rated for up to 30 pounds. I have yet to have gotten a carp even beyond a certain weight that has ever stressed that out. However, now I have a actual carp kit that has heavier swivels, so I'll probably start using those, but not for breading. I try to keep the rig very light for breading because I want it to either sit on the top and not get me pulled down or to drift really slow and get to the bottom. Rating minimum. So I try to have the lightest rod and line rating I can. Now, one of the ones that I actually use for breading for smaller carp, and I know those bodies of water that I hit to do that, it only has 6-pound braid to 6-pound fluorocarbon. But it's a 9-foot 5-weight 4-piece fly blink that I had made into a spinning rod into a 2-piece. So I have a 1,000 size reel on that with that accoutrement, and it works very well for breading. Now, it's kind of a battle when I get a bigger carp on, but I can still handle it. But it's been all the way down to the butt half the time. So usually with my regular minimum rating rig, I do a number 1 to 1/0 circle hook typically. Now I've got carp specific hooks. I'm starting to use those. 20 to 30 pound braid, 4 or 8 strands, okay. If I prefer 4 because it's a little more abrasion resistance in some ways. It's not quite so slippery. 8 is a pretty slick line. But you can also take one of the British coating things and make it to where it'll do the connection knot a lot better. And I use 10 to 14 pound called polymer mono typically for breading. Bait, I use the cheapest white bread I can, which is a $1.42 loaf of white sandwich bread from Walmart. Be sure to avoid the ones on the carts that fill up the whole aisle that tend to get in the way, and they're in the bread aisle a lot. Just saying. I'm not fucking with people. It's literal. It's Walmart. Discounted rolls or croissants. I found that I get in there sometimes, and there's whole bags of croissants or discounted rolls. They're like 90 cents for a whole bag. They work. Especially if you're just doing top water. Curve in a piece of crust and let it sit on the top. If they're actively on top, that's phenomenal because it'll start soaking into the bread, but it still won't always start sinking below the surface, and it's phenomenal for that. So be aware of that. I primarily use white. I either fold or flat press or twist on ball. I use the micro swivels and small hooks to minimize the fish's ability to detect the tackle. That's one of the other reasons I use the swivel. It's the detection factor, and also because it has less pressure to pull it under the water, okay? If I use weight, it is almost always just a couple of small split shots as I want minimal drag. Again, excuse my language, a detection factor. On the bottom, with bread, they're a little bit different than like pop-ups and pack bait. With pop-ups and pack bait, they're like on it. If they're on it, they can still be shy in that circumstance. But with bread, they're either really off or really on with it. So if you have less detectable stuff in the water with the bread, it's more likely to get a much more instant hit, and that's why I cater to that. Fancy bread I reserve for active top feeders. Again, goes back to the rolls and whatnot. It'll start soaking and soften quick and makes an easy to eat topwater bread. I use European slip floats, either deep or beaded and pinned, shallow 4 to 6 foot max with no weight if I use a float. Now, what do I mean by that? Excuse me, still getting over this sick shit. I don't have the pack with me. It's in my car. Essentially what they are is they're just balsa or reeds that people all the way old school to, the late 1800s in Europe, they would have a slot. Nowadays they have swivels, but you would pin it some way, somehow. Some people used toothpicks. Some people used branches. There's all sorts of ways people have done throughout time. I use 2 micro rubber slip float stoppers on each side with a medium-sized plastic bead. And the cool thing of that is, if I want it to be a slip bobber, I literally only have to raise that top float stop and bead, and it'll slide that extra amount. So it makes it into a pinnable and a slip bobber type rig at the same time. And if I'm using small amounts of bread, like real minimal, it is phenomenal, man. It fucks shit up. I had one time, I go to a place called Layton Lakes quite a bit, okay? And there's sections in there that are pretty shallow. There's sections more toward the fountains that are pretty deep. I prefer the shallow sections because they tend to be quicker to hit. I understand most of the time that the potential for the biggest carp is where there's bigger portions of water and deeper. However, I've gotten some absolute horses of carp in the shallow section that I typically go to. And if I have that float, it works amazing. I've got like 7 or 8 different ones that a friend of mine that's on Facebook actually made for me as samples, no less. And I'm probably going to ask him for a couple different varieties that are in different sizes. But they are definitely in line with the British form of float fishing. The modern British floats still work as well, but what I like to do with my floats is to have the bread on there so it's kind of top water, or I ball it up enough to where it'll float down. But I like to give myself enough length that it'll lay on the bottom. So the float is sitting horizontal and the bait's on the bottom. So it's essentially like this. And then when they take off, it just turns down and it goes in the water. I find that it's a much better indicator than just sitting there holding on to the line. And, sometimes with the carp, they really kind of let you know right off the bat that they've taken something, because they can pull your fucking arm off if you're not careful, which is also why I ended up getting a new Akuma bait feeder on top of that. Now, I need to get a longer rod for that bait feeder because that 8,000 size is way too big for my stalker rod, and then put my 3,000 size back on that. The 3,000 size has 20-pound braid to 14 copolymer on it as well. So it's a great stock rod. It casts plenty far, but it's much better with the 3,000 size reel with that line on it than that 8,000. Now, it still bounces in my hand because it's a heavy reel and it sits down into the rod. But it's really not made for an 8-foot rod. It really needs to be on a 10 to 12 foot. So I've got to get a European stock carp rod at some point. I just really don't have a lot of extra funds, especially since I got to fix my teeth. And I know my out-of-pocket, even with top-line insurance, is going to be phenomenal. And I'm trying to keep my fucking nest egg, man, because the way that shit is right now in the world, I don't know where things are going to go. So I know I go off and on every now and then. So recap, I do lightest lane possible for a given rig. Smallest reel I can get away with, lightest rod I can get away with, depending on what I'm going for and where. And I always do braid to copolymer or mono for bread. And I do a fairly, depending on what kind of copolymer, I do an 18 to 32 foot leader. But the suffix I'm using right now just doesn't allow that. It gets way too coily, so I'm sticking with an 8 to 10 foot now, which the carp really don't seem to mind. It gives them plenty of distance to not see the braid. But, honestly, most hair rigs are braid too, so they really don't always care. I've just always been, since switching to braid to leader, the kind of person that cares about the length of the leader. A lot of people just do 6 to 8 foot. I have a different concept of that, and I've got other videos on that if you feel like watching those, but I'm not going to get into that now. So, cheap-ass bread, as microscopic terminal tackle as you can get, a little bit of patience, observe the water, and you could do really, really well.